Well, thanks, Alex. An outstanding game, an exciting game between Northern Iowa and NDSU. The Bison coming out on top 23-21 in this quarterfinal FCS playoff football game, and it felt like a playoff atmosphere out here, didn't it?
It really did. It was, I think once the whistle call, they said they heard a whistle in the stands, and that played that. The fans are like, oh, what the heck with this? You're going to call us for a whistle in the stands. We're going to let you have it. And I thought that was a huge turning point in the game, and I think from that point forward, the defense really fed off it. And Northern Iowa could not do anything offensively after that point.
This Bison defense, they talked this week about being challenged after this last game. They were well aware that Aaron Bailey came in second half and ran all over them. Nick DeLuca saying this week that it was missed fits, it was missed tackles, but that was also things that the Bison were capable of improving upon for this time. They had some film, they knew they were expecting Aaron Bailey, and it was clear in this performance today that this Bison defense knew Aaron Bailey's number.
And they had everything fitted up perfectly, and they tackled really well. And I think that's, at this point in the season, we saw with Illinois State, missed tackles can really hurt a team. To hold Bailey and Tyvis Smith, who ran for 400 yards against Portland State, to 90 total yards, tells you just how dominating the performance was. And Bailey, again, forced into some tough third and longs. We talked about that in the pregame, how important that was. And to get him in these third and longs, he just is not built to convert those kinds of plays, and that's why he's only 10 of 16 for 100 yards passing.
It wasn't easy sailing for the Bison offense either, though. I mean, they only had 226 some yards, something like that. Of course, King Frazier getting 107 of those. He had a huge performance today, hard-fought yards, but that's the point. It was hard-fought yards, and in the end, the Bison did get it done.
You know, you kept waiting, are the Bison going to finally get over the hump? And they got down to the 30-yard line multiple times and just could not do anything when they got there. They missed a couple of field goals, then they had some plays for yardage, then they got behind the chains. And it was an issue, and you kept saying, the longer you let Northern Iowa hang around, the bigger issue it's going to be. But finally, King Frazier ripping off that long run, I thought was the huge momentum changer when the Bison were backed up in their own territory, leading by 4. That ends up being a touchdown, going up 2 scores, and from that point forward, I think you felt somewhat comfortable because the defense was playing so well.
Easton Stick in this game, obviously a talking point coming in because everybody was wondering whether or not we would see Carson Wentz finally. Even the UNI staff asking trainers before the game, well, warm-ups are going and Carson isn't out there. Still kind of expecting in the back of their head that game changer and Carson Wentz to come in. Easton Stick plays this entire game. You don't see a ton of him, though. Is that accounting for UNI accounting for that quarterback run game, you think? What do you think is in that?
Well, I think when you look at the strength of the UNI defense, it's up front with their defensive linemen. They're very good at getting pressure on the quarterback, very good in that department. And their 2 safeties, DeAndre Hall and Tim Kilfoy, I think both have a chance to be on NFL rosters after this season. So you don't want to put Easton in a position where he's got to make multiple reads across the field and potentially make a game-changing mistake. And I think that was the one thing. They put him in situations where he could be successful and say, Easton, if it's not there, eat it, try to run it, or throw it away, but just don't make that mistake. And for the most part, he didn't do that. I mean, his numbers aren't eye-popping today, but he did move the chains on a couple of different occasions, completed a big pass to Darius Shepard to get a 1st and goal on 2nd down. So, you know, it comes down to just making some plays when you need to make them.
And not to mention, he never turned the ball over. There were no Easton Stick interceptions, which I think would have really turned the tide in this game. Turning the tide, though, absolutely, was that Bruce Anderson kickoff return to open up. I mean, Coach Kleiman saying post-game that it was important. They said they needed to get a momentum push. They needed something maybe from the special teams. Well, 6 seconds in, there's Bruce Anderson, 2nd week in a row.
Well, you know, when the offense is struggling to move the football, and let's be honest, they only had about 79 total yards in the first half. So they needed a spark. They needed somebody to help them on special teams, and that was not an easy return for Bruce. It looked like he was going to get out to about the 30, 35-yard line. Okay, good field position. Steps out of a tackle, and all of a sudden, he takes it all the way for a touchdown, and that got everything rocking in the Fargodome. I think that gave the Bison more confidence on defense, knowing, okay, we have a lead to play with now. And I think it changed maybe the way Tim Polasek had to worry about dialing some things up. When you're playing from behind, sometimes you got to take a few more chances. And the way the defense was playing, I think Tim maybe didn't have to go that route as much in the 3rd and 4th quarter because they were able to run the football.
Sticking with special teams, we have to talk about Ben LeCompte. I mean, he had a 71-yard punt last week. He had a 62-yard one today. And more than anything, he was pinning UNI back when they were kind of on the edge. You kind of felt like, oh no, they might be close to breaking free at some point.
You know, and that's the one scary thing, I think, with Northern Iowa is you put them on a short field like the one turnover did in the first half, and you worry because the way they can run the football, they can be a very good red zone team. And for the most part, I thought Ben put them on a deep field. And forcing a team like Northern Iowa that was not having a lot of success on the ground to drive the ball 80, 85, 90 yards, 97 yards. I mean, they were pinned inside their own territory so much in the second half that they put the Bison defense in good position. Okay, you give up a play. You give up play here and there, but you still got to go 70 yards. So that was huge. I mean, it was huge last week against Montana. I mean, that's the weapon Ben LeCompte is. That doesn't show up in stats, and people think, okay, well, whatever. But I think the last 2 weeks we've seen just how valuable that guy is, especially in a playoff game.
Ben LeCompte mentioning that he knew exactly how last night's game went. He knew that Illinois State had lost, that Richmond had won, and that meant if the Bison won, this game was back in Frisco, the semifinals. The road to Frisco is once again through the Fargodome. I know the coaches said they didn't talk about it, but do you think that was a driving factor? Do you think we saw a little of that edge in some of these seniors who know how important it will be to have their last game be that semifinal?
Well, I think so, and I think it's not like they're living in, cubes. I mean, they know what's going on in the world, and they know what was at stake after coming into the game. But I think they also realized we got to take care of business here first before we worry about any sort of semifinal. I thought they were a focus group. I thought you saw that today. But now the fact that they have gotten through and passed Northern Iowa and take on a very talented Richmond team who went on the road and won at Illinois State, at least you're playing them here. You're not having to go to Illinois State. You don't have to travel. That makes it a lot easier, especially if it's a Friday game, which it could certainly be. And, that's a huge factor. I don't think Richmond has seen an environment like this. We've seen how teams coming in for the first time struggle a little bit with that. So that's definitely a huge factor. And the fact that Illinois State lost, it's a big deal.
Before I get too far into this playoff talk, I do want to talk about the two different halves of football that we saw today from the Bison. I think it's been a while since there's been so clear-cut halves from the Bison, and but it was encouraging to see that they were able to come out and really just amp it up a little bit. I mean, that defense could have easily gotten tired and worn down, but they only had 9 plays in the third quarter that they even had to be out there. I mean, that's impressive.
It really is, and I think if you take away that first drive, and again, that first drive, that touchdown drive was a 75-yard drive that went right down the field, and you think, man, what's going on here? Well, throughout the rest of the game, the Bison gave up like 100 yards in the rest of the game after that first drive. That is an impressive feat, and I think that them settling in, getting comfortable, kind of having a good beat, I think, on Northern Iowa, and the fact that they really struggle throwing the football, when you can play man up with C.J. Smith and their best receiver, it all factors in. But they all just did their job so well, and it's not always about being the more physical team and making the big plays. It's about being where you're supposed to be, in the Bison won.
And Nick DeLuca had 12 tackles in the first half alone, well on pace to maybe even having a career high. But then he ended with 16, and I think that's evident of the Bison defense stepping up as a whole and playing together as a team. Now, as we get into this next round of the playoffs, the semifinals, I mean, what are you expecting from the Bison this week? How did they approach it, knowing it may be a short week, and of course, upon taping here, we don't know when that game will be, but playing Richmond, having them at home, but finally playing an opponent that they haven't seen this season.
And I think that changes the dynamics a little bit for the game, and I think it changes the dynamics for Richmond too. Coming to an environment like this is going to be different. They have played a Missouri Valley team, but they have not really faced a team like North Dakota State. And the CAA is a very good league, but they don't run a lot of power I sets like North Dakota State does. And fortunately for NDSU, they've played against teams that run similar skills to what Richmond does, but boy, they have playmakers. So it could be one of those games that you have to feel your way through it a little bit. But again, they're going to get in the film room and they're going to try to develop a good game plan, go out and practice, be ready.
And of course, the big variable in there is the Fargodome. I think we've seen what can happen to a team from a different conference when they've come into the Fargodome. That's where you hear about it. You kind of worry about these Missouri Valley teams who have experienced it.
Yeah.
Now, it got the better of Northern Iowa today, and I think that was evident. But typically, when a Missouri Valley team is here, they've heard it, they know it, they can kind of talk about it and prepare for it. But that's going to be probably a wrench that Richmond hasn't quite handled, because they certainly didn't have a crowd at Illinois State this past weekend that they will have here in the Fargodome.
No question, and that's going to be a huge determining factor in the game. And really, I thought that was really a disadvantage for Illinois State, is the crowd did not bother Richmond at all, because there wasn't a lot of people there wasn't a lot of noise. And when you get a team like Richmond that's all about timing and a lot of what they do, This is going to help the defense immensely get off the football and try to get upfield and make some plays. Their quarterback is dynamic, they can make plays, but again, how do they adjust to that? I just think that's going to be a huge factor in the football game, absolutely.
Well, an exciting one out here, 23-13 the final. I want to give you a second to give kind of your final thoughts on this one and what this win you think means as the Bison continue this journey on this drive for 5.
Yeah, you know what? It's a great team win. It wasn't always the most pretty game, I think, in terms of what they did. I think they had some opportunities to get more points and give themselves more breathing room, but at the same time, you're playing an opponent that knows you so well that just getting by, I think you feel good about it. Northern Iowa's a good football team. They would have beaten a lot of teams. And knowing that you've played them, you've played Montana, you know, it's tough to do that, to beat a team twice in a season, especially when a rival team that has as much talent as Northern Iowa does. So impressed with all aspects, all aspects. The offensive line played well. They made plays when they had to offensively. Defensively, so sound. And then when you look at special teams, what a huge difference maker. Northern Iowa did not have any big plays in special teams. North Dakota State was always set up on good fields and always had Northern Iowa set up in short fields. And long fields, that makes a big difference in football.
And we didn't say it this whole time, but it is important to notice Brian Schatz. How about it? Getting after Aaron Bailey, getting the safety. I mean, talk about a nail in a coffin there. It was an exciting one, a fun one here at the Fargodome for everyone involved. I think it's safe to say we have a ton of coverage continuing to come at you the rest of the week as NDSU prepares for Richmond. It's finals week. It's a short week more than likely, but the Bison will be active and so will we. So stick with us on Valley News Live and valleynewslive.com.